Welcome back to MotionPic Recap. Today we're going to recap a movie titled The Rock. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Brigadier General Francis seeks forgiveness from his dead wife before he and his team enter a military establishment to begin their mission. Francis's team intends to kill anyone who resists. They kill young guards to infiltrate the facility and steal hazardous military equipment. They steal biological warheads from a vault, but one drops, releasing deadly gas. They escape, sealing the vault and trapping a teammate inside to a horrible death. Somewhere else, aboard FBI biochemist, Dr. Stanley Goodspeed and colleagues are alerted they've got a potential bomb. They rush to the basement to deactivate the device brought in. Inside a box they find a doll emitting gas. Stanley tries to disarm a bomb inside it, while a colleague's suit melts, causing panic. People outside yell at the colleague to inject an antidote by piercing the needle through his heart. Stanley successfully disarms the device, stopping the gas, and saving the colleague from having to stab himself. At home, Stanley discusses the stress of his job, and comments on not having children. His girlfriend then reveals she is pregnant, shocking him after his recent remarks. Stanley's girlfriend proposes, but he hesitates, making her upset. On Alcatraz, General Francis and his men take over during a tour, kidnapping civilians and the guide. Francis's team establishes a full military takeover of Alcatraz Island. They set up communications, load weapons, prepare biological missiles, and lay booby traps. Francis apologizes to the hostages, promising they won't be hurt, and will be released soon. He offers his men a chance to leave, but they all choose to stay. Francis explains, their cause is to compensate families of 83 soldiers, lost on a secret mission, whose deaths were covered up. They demand $1 million per family. Francis calls the Pentagon, condemning their neglect of the 83 dead soldiers. Their families receive no burial, medals, compensation, or information about their sacrifice. Francis threatens San Fransisco with biological weapons capable of killing 70,000. Unless the Pentagon pays $1 million per family from illegal arms sales. The Pentagon needs a biochem specialist, calling Stanley and says they need him in San Francisco. Stanley tells Carla he wants to marry her, inviting her to come with him to San Francisco. The Pentagon plans an Alcatraz tunnel infiltration, needing an escapee. Stanley flies to an FBI facility and is briefed on the real mission. He is shown the dangerous prisoner they need, the only man who knows Alcatraz's old tunnel routes. The prisoner, John Mason, an Alcatraz escapee from 30 years ago, is asked to help guide SEALs. He demands a hotel stay and a haircut before the mission, but the FBI refuses initially. Stanley offers Mason freedom for his help, and Mason agrees to sign the contract. But FBI Director Womack tears it up since he don't want Mason free. Meanwhile, Mason sharpens a coin, cuts a hole in the glass, seeing Womack, and calls him a piece of shit. Stanley calls Carla to tell her not to come to San Francisco, but she refuses. Eventually Mason finally gets a proper shower. Mason secretly grabs rope and orders snacks while showing, and then gets a haircut. He prepares the rope during the haircut as agents inside enjoy the free food. Suddenly Mason attaches the rope to Womack and throws him over the balcony, dropping the rope for Stanley. He flees, taking the elevator down with a scared stylist. Mason escapes through a kitchen, hitting Stanley, who follows him, and then steals a car. Stanley is soon on his feet again and takes another car to pursue. Police and Stanley chase Mason through San Francisco. Mason crashes recklessly but seems unstoppable, while police vehicles crash and are disabled during the pursuit. Stanley skillfully maneuvers through Mason's improvised roadblocks, closing the distance. Mason uses a car phone to find a specific person's address in the city. Avoiding an old woman, Mason crashes into and derails a tram. Stanley avoids passengers but crashes his car, forcing him to continue on foot. Stanley steals a motorbike to continue the chase. He calls a colleague and asks if Mason has any next of kin in the city. Finding out Mason has a daughter called Jade, Mason has arranged to meet his daughter Jade in a park, and she asks about his past, since her mother only told her the FBI took him after a prison escape, asking what he did. Mason tells Jade he doesn't have much time and must go but will return, saying she is just about the only proof he exists. Having overheard it, Stanley walks up and tells Jade that Mason is working with the FBI on a special case. Mason thanks Stanley for that, and Stanley urges him to focus on the hostages. Now and then Womack arrives furious. Mason struggles to recall his Alcatraz escape route details for the SEAL team. The SEAL team insists Mason join them despite Womack's objection needing his guidance. However, they threaten to kill Mason if he compromises any of the men. Stanley locates the warheads and is told he must go with the SEALs to disarm them. Sick with fear, he worries about the city and his pregnant fiancée flying in. Paxton promises Carla's safety, telling Stanley to focus on the mission. Meanwhile, Francis negotiates with the president, giving 17 hours until he shoots the bio-rockets. On land, the SEAL team reviews their plan, and the plan is for Mason to guide them. Stanley to neutralize rockets, and as soon as the rockets are disabled, they should light flares to signal success. In the helicopter they receive atropine needles against gas exposure. As they near Alcatraz, Carla is told what is happening, and gets worried. Team prepares for scuba insertion, and Mason jokes about Stanley not seem to knowing how diving gear works, warning Stanley that his inexperience could kill them. Carla worries about Stanley's poor swimming when learning they are diving, and simultaneously Francis spots the helicopter and sends a patrol to the beach. The team enters flooded tunnels, but hits a dead end. Mason recognizes it as a dangerous passage from his escape. 30 years ago, entering the dangerous passage alone, as others watch nervously. He reappears opening a door and welcomes them to Alcatraz. Mason guides them underground, noting it's more exciting than Stanley's job. Hearing Francis's men overhead, they hide to avoid detection. They reach the prison's shower room, where they detect a motion sensor in their path, and attempting to disarm it, it triggers an alarm that Francis's men sees. Francis's men silently enter the shower room, and then surprises the SEALs climbing out, and they order them to freeze and surrender. The SEAL leader refuses to drop weapons, escalating tensions into a standoff. Suddenly the sound from a falling stone triggers chaotic gunfire between the SEALs below and Francis's men above. The unprotected SEALs below are killed in the fight. The last SEAL who climbs up is also killed, and Mason takes the dead SEAL's weapon. Mason then walks away, followed by Stanley, who stops when Mason shows a gun. Mason says he is leaving, and gives Stanley his earpiece to inform command everyone is dead, and that Mason is leaving. And they tell him to stop Mason. Soon after, Francis contacts command, damning them for making him kill more innocent soldiers. Paxton confronts Womack about who Mason really is, learning he's a British spy who once stole FBI Director Hoover's compromising microfilms of presidents and ministers to blackmail and rule the world. In the tunnels, Mason takes Stanley's gun, so Stanley reveals the biological weapon threat and the danger to Carla and Jade. As Francis's men search tunnels for more SEALs, Mason agrees to help Stanley stop the gas rockets. Suddenly bombs are dropped into the tunnel, forcing them to run quickly. After diving into water damaging their comms, Mason asks Stanley if he's ready to disarm the rockets, handing him a gun for protection. Stanley expresses apprehension, but Mason pushes him to be a fighter. They enter the first rocket location, killing the guards, and as Mason effectively shoots down the enemy, Stanley tells him to be careful of the rocket. Stanley then starts working on disarming a bioweapon. Stanley explains the gas balls contain deadly nerve toxin that can kill a whole city. He is modifying the rocket's guidance so it will detonate harmlessly over the ocean. Somewhere on the island, Francis notices his men haven't reported back from a rocket location and sends men to check. Being shot at, Mason and Stanley accidentally board a runaway cart on rails. Picking up speed, the cart derails, and Stanley grabs onto a metal container, while Mason gets tangled in ropes. Stanley sees approaching Marines, and Mason prepares something while still being stuck. As a Marine shoots at Stanley, Mason sprays something and ignites him. Hen then cuts free and falls into the water below. Marines start chasing Stanley, but Mason intervenes and kills one. The fight continues, and as Mason wrestles one Marine, Stanley picks up a gun and shoots him. After Stanley asks Mason who he really is, and he explains he's a spy for British intelligence, but remarks he'd rather been a farmer. Meanwhile, the Pentagon prepares an airstrike, and Francis broadcasts in speakers, He'll kill civilians if any surviving SEALs don't surrender. Mason tells Stanley to disarm the last 3 rockets alone, as he will surrender himself. He appears before the Marines identifying himself as Captain John Mason, SAS. Mason then condemns Francis's plan as lunacy, calling him a fool for thinking killing millions honors the dead soldiers. Mason states he's all that's left of the SEAL team. But then gunfire is heard. Marines find Stanley, who disarmed 1 more rocket, and he and Mason are put into separate prison cells. In the cell, Stanley asks Mason how you survived prison for so long, and Mason cites the hope of seeing his daughter. In Washington, the president orders the airstrike of the island to start preparation. Stanley asks how he escaped his prison cell last time, and at that very second, the cell doors suddenly open. Next, Mason prepares to leave, but Stanley urges stopping Francis. But he replies he saw Francis isn't a killer in his eyes. Meanwhile, Francis refuses the Pentagon's request for more time, with 3 minutes left to rocket launch. Francis's men push him to fire a rocket to show he is serious, and he orders one launched. Mason refuses to continue this suicide mission, and Stanley decides to stop Francis himself. A Marine stops Stanley again, and Stanley starts trying to convince him they need to stop the rockets, but then Mason appears and kills the Marine. Francis orders the rocket launch, which heads for the city. At the last moment, Francis rewrites the target coordinates, sending it towards the ocean instead. The rocket detonates underwater with no biohazard. Stanley remarks he thinks it missed, but Mason believes it was intentional, saying again, Francis is no killer. Soon after, they hear Francis arguing with Major Baxter. Major Baxter wants them to extend the deadline, but Francis refuses, drawing his gun. Meanwhile, the president reluctantly approves the airstrike, knowing it will kill the 81 hostages. And the Air Force bombers approach. Francis's men confront Francis himself about changing the target. But Francis declares the mission over, orders civilians to be freed, and says he'll take responsibility. He adds he won't kill civilians and says they won't get any money, saying their bluff was called. He orders his men to stand down, resulting in a standoff as Mason and Stanley arrive. Suddenly, they start shooting, and Francis is hit. The 2 run out and grab Francis, asking him where the last rocket is, and revealing its location. Stanley runs to disarm it. Stanley reaches the rocket and disarms it, removing the gas balls, but then a Marine arrives. The Marine accidentally stands in front of the empty rocket, and Stanley activates it, which kills him. He then runs up to the roof with the gas balls to remove the targeting chip, as another Marine starts pursuing him. Stressed, he loses 1 ball, but saves it from rolling off the roof. A 3rd Marine shoots at Stanley, and Mason quickly climbs up and kills him. The 2nd Marine reaches the roof, and Stanley jumps off the building, all while 5 aircraft close in on the island. Another Marine ambushes Mason. But Mason is more experienced, and he kills him in hand-to-hand combat. The last Marine chases Stanley through the facilities. He catches up with Stanley and they start wrestling. Stanley shoves the gas ball he saved into the Marine's mouth, and as gas spreads, Stanley stabs himself with the needle in his heart to inject himself with atropine. Semi-conscious, Stanley sees planes approaching and lights the green flares as planned. A sniper sees the flares, but too late, and a massive explosion occurs. The blast throws unconscious Stanley into the ocean, and Mason quickly runs to save him, pulling him out and remarks about him having to save his ass all the time. Stanley calls command, who cheer for mission success, and lies by saying that Mason is dead. He then tells Mason his home address, and that he may take some of his clothes and some money hidden in his house to start a new life. Mason thanks him, and gives Stanley a note, telling him to find a hollow-legged table in a Kansas church. Stanley soon after convinces Paxton and Womack that Mason vaporized in the blast. Weeks later in Kansas, Stanley and Carla find a microfilm inside the hollow leg. Reading it, Stanley asks Carla if she wants to know who really killed John F. Kennedy. The end. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and hit the like button to help us out. Until next time, take care.